All right. Excuse me. Good morning. Welcome to another episode of the Liberty Dad Podcast, a discussion on politics and culture. I am your host, DL, America's most objective libertarian. If you're tuning in live, thank you so much for giving me your time so early. Remember, folks, if you are a candidate running for office and you would like an opportunity to be on the show, then head on over to candidates.libertydad.com. Get yourself booked. The link is in the show notes. Available times are Tuesday and Thursday mornings at 7:30 a.m., Wednesday and Thursday evenings at 7:30 p.m. All times are Eastern. Speaking of candidates, I actually got a light load this week. Not sure how that happened. It seems like it was going in spurts, like you'd get like 2 or 3 or 4 requests all of a sudden, and then it'd be like 0. But anyway, this week, there are no morning interviews. So no candidates have to get up super early to jump on the show. However, I do have 2 evening shows. This, what is it? This Tuesday night, I'm sorry, Wednesday night, my bad. This Wednesday night, I have Ty Galvin, who is running for Assembly District 21 out of Nevada. So that'll be a good conversation. I think that will now be the 3rd person out of Nevada. So looks like they're doing pretty good out there, getting their candidates up and running. And then we're going to jump on over to New Hampshire on Thursday night. And we're going to talk to Ben Weir, who is running for Merrimack County Sheriff. So that'll be a fun conversation. Now that could be an interesting one. And the reason I say that, Ben has been on the show before, actually twice. He was on when he became a dad. And it was so funny because he was like a week or 2 in, maybe not even, I don't know. He was on my dad talk show and he decided to come on for a morning show. And he gets on, this is before the show. He gets on and he's like, dude, I'm not high. His eyes were like bloodshot. And he's like, I am that tired. And I was like, I get it, bro. No explanation necessary. I totally get it. So he was on for that. And then prior to that, he had just recently moved from, I believe, California to New Hampshire, and he ran for Merrimack County Sheriff then. And he is, to date, the only candidate to ever have come on the show and do show and tell. And so who knows if he'll do that again. But it was interesting because what he was doing was showing the parts to his rifle that were not legal in California, but were legal in New Hampshire. And he kind of went through an explanation. And then he talked about his run for county sheriff. So we will see if he steps up his game. Now, look, if you're a candidate, your role is not to step up your game necessarily on the show and be like, haha, I was the only one that did this. But if you do, that's kind of neat. Ultimately, at the end of the day, hopefully when you candidates are running, you are stepping up your game out on the campaign trail. Right. Like this, but it's cool. It's cool. It was kind of a neat thing to say, like, hey, he did a show and tell of firearm stuff. So that was cool. So we'll see what he's got going on. All right. I was gone last week, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So I've got this logo here, right? It's a saw blade. And it represents like the saw blade with a tie, like a shirt and tie in the center of it and a flame for liberty. And it's supposed to represent this mixture of, hey, I work in an office. I work for corporate America, but at the same time, you can also catch me outside working in my yard. You can catch me in my makeshift shop, which is more like a garage. with my garage, triple. It doesn't double; it triples as storage for our vehicles, just regular storage. You know how garages are, and then also my woodworking shop, and so it's a constant struggle to keep it all in order. But anyway, I don't get out there in the shop enough, and I realized it this week or this last week when I was working on my son's Pinewood Derby car. Now, part of my problem is that when I come up with designs, I do not design stuff. I'm not very good at it. Um, and so like I've never built a Pinewood Derby car. So I'm, trying to like figure out like, okay, I've watched a bunch of videos. I got the gist of, how you're supposed to design it. So now I'm like, all right, let's try to figure this out. And so I was trying to do some things, and the smartest move that I made was I took the because you when you enter in, the rules are you're supposed to use the official Pinewood Derby piece of wood that they give you and some of the components like the wheels and whatnot. And so I was like, all right, measure twice, cut once, right? So I made blocks from just 2x4s of the that were just the exact same size as the Pinewood Derby, and then whatever cuts I wanted to make and whatever things I was doing, I would practice on those so that I would get a feel for, okay, how difficult is whatever I'm trying to do going to be. And anyway, all that being said, I started out with some like bigger ideas in my head, and I narrowed it down, and it literally is just like this. It's just a sleek, like almost arrow shaped. There's not a lot of cuts in it. That's where we've landed. We're still working on it. I need to get a new router bit blade so I can make some additional cuts to put the weights in. So we're doing that. And then this last weekend, I took my little guy, my son and I. We went out to Pensacola, 5.5 hour, 6 hour drive. We went out there for like one day. We drove out Friday morning. We got there and we had some dinner and whatever, chill out. Stayed up too late watching movies because that was cool. And then the next morning we got up and we went to the National Naval Aviation Museum, which is there on the base. And what was interesting was I didn't realize it was on base. I didn't really look that closely. And so Google Maps, it took me to the east entrance. And when I got to the east entrance, there's like this line, and they're like, visitors over here. And I was like, all right, I'm a visitor. So I come over, and I'm like, yeah, I'm going to the museum. They're like, all right, cool. Go in that parking lot, go in there and get a permit for your car. And I was like, oh, okay, that's fine. We're just gonna go and let you know that I'm here, right? Show you my ID or something. So I had to fill out a form, and it kind of felt intense because I'm like, I'm just going to a museum with my son, which I didn't realize was on base in the first place. And so then so I fill out this form, and it's like wants my social security number, wants my driver's license number, and then like toward the end, it's like, who's your sponsor? And I was like, sponsor? And I'm like, I don't. So like I'm starting to get nervous because I'm like, just want to go to the museum. Now, apparently, you only need a sponsor if you're going somewhere else on the base, like if you're just visiting or something like that. And then they're like, all right, who are you visiting? So anyway, what was really interesting was I actually got lucky and I went, to the east entrance and was able to get that paperwork. But then I had to drive all the way around to the other side of the base and come in from the west entrance to go to the aviation museum. And so this was like a lot of effort because I'm like, I'm in my mind when I get to Pensacola, I'm thinking we'll get up in the morning, we'll have some breakfast, we'll go over and we'll check out this museum for several hours, which we did. I just wasn't expecting to drive, all around Pensacola and then have to fill out all kind of forms. And I get it, like we're at not war with Iran, so therefore, they've probably locked down the bases or added extra, scrutiny or whatever. So anyway, it was a good trip. We got tons and tons of pictures. It's for his school. He's got a school project, and we had a lot of fun checking that out. We also we went to some place called Fast Eddie's. I think it's called Fast Eddie's. Basically, like not an amusement park. What do they call those? They had like go karts, and they had putt putt and video games and stuff like that. So we got to go be little boys and play and have some fun. So that was cool. So it was a great weekend, great time off. But now we're back. We're back, and it's time for a bill review. So what are we gonna do in terms of a bill review? Before I get into that, let me answer some chat here. Why does DL still sound like he has allergies? Did the Nuvage machine not work? No, it works. It works. In fact, a couple weeks ago, it worked too well. I used it too much, I think, and I think it irritated my nasal passages, and so I had a couple of days that were extremely rough. But in terms of like, is it working? Am I getting better? Yes. I think I just have allergy issues, and but I seem to be on the upswing. So there's that. So just still a little bit of congestion. Not too bad. My cough that I had is just about gone. So that's cool. Hubs and I have to fill out an MWR form like that to play golf on the Mayport base, background check and all. Yep. All right. So yeah, we had to do that same. Yeah, I had to do the same thing. So, but I was kind of nervous because I was like, man, this seems like a lot. Because I haven't been on base in like, I don't know, 30 years. I haven't been on a single base. So anyway, so that's what we got. All right, what do we talk about today? Let's dive into it here. So I saw this pop up. Oh, let me let me do the neutral music there. About that. There we go. We're gonna do the neutral music because we're not clowning. So I tried it when I'm showing social media stuff, like comments from social media. I have the clown music for when I want to kind of like make fun of what you're saying. In this particular case, this is leading into the topic today. So I saw this 50 Shades of Way account, and they said, they go, there's a new bipartisan bill to counter the mass surveillance of Americans, but I don't see anyone talking about it. This should be much bigger news. They are correct. Something like that should be huge news. It mandates warrants before the government can access Americans' web browsing history, search queries, location data, and information from connected vehicles. What? Connected vehicles? That sounds a bit crazy. But we are in the Internet of Things these days. Everything has a connection. Like you buy a toaster. It's like, would you like to set up Wi-Fi? And you're like, what? Right? Like there are devices that I'm like, why would I want this connected to the internet? That doesn't even make any sense. Like this is just crazy stuff. So, but that's what we have these days. And all that stuff is collecting information. All right. So then it goes on and says, it also prohibits government agencies from purchasing the private communication location information and other personal data of Americans from third-party data brokers. Whoa. Did you know your government was doing that? Did you realize that the government basically, to get around, I need a warrant, they'll just go buy it? So I want you to think about this. I want you to think about how this is. You're being taxed, right? So the government's like, give us your money. They're taking some of your money. And then they're taking that money and they're like, let's go buy information with your stolen money about you that we might normally have to go get a warrant for. How do you like those bananas? That's pretty wild, huh? It bans backdoor searches where government officials look through information collected on non-Americans for data on Americans. We're gonna look into that a little bit more here. This is objectively one of the most significant bipartisan reform proposals to prevent government overreach in decades. I think it should go further than this, but it's a good start and it's important for us to pay attention to. Everything has changed since 9/11 and more so since the Snowden leak. We've lost so much of our privacy. It's going to be an uphill battle just to get it back. They're correct. Actually, let me just amend that. It's not going to be an uphill battle to get it back. It's going to be an uphill battle to stop it currently. To even slow it down is going to be an uphill battle. So, I mean, it's going to be an uphill battle to get your privacy back, but just know there are uphill battles before that. We've got to slow down this machine, right? Perhaps stop it if we can. Say, all right, no more. Get no more privileges to do things with American data, with data on American people. So, and then if you get past those, then it's a matter of trying to get your privacy back. So good luck. Mike Lee, he put out a poll I think about 8,000 people responded to it or so. And it said, should Congress refuse to reauthorize Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, FISA? It expires April 20th, absent language making the government get a warrant before searching Americans' private communications that were, quote, incidentally collected, end quote, under 702. And it looks like 94.5% of the respondents said yes, that Congress should refuse to reauthorize Section 702. All right, until something has changed with what government is permitted to do. And I think this is especially a critical conversation to have today because we are at not war with Iran. And whenever there is a not wartime situation or a wartime situation, then what you have is a government that's like, well, we need to make sure that there aren't any threats in the United States. We're going to need to start snooping and looking around a little bit more. It's for your safety. That's what they say. So then he also posted, Mike Lee again, FISA 702 is for spying on foreign terrorists. The conversations of U.S. citizens shouldn't be monitored without a warrant, but they have been under FISA 702. Congress shouldn't reauthorize FISA 702 without a warrant requirement protecting U.S. citizens. So you can see he's got what appears to be an image, and that's actually a video. So let me go ahead and play this video, and we will see what we're talking about with FISA 702. So let's see. I believe this is the video. Is that the right one? Make sure.
The biggest concern
Nope, that's not it. Wrong one. I had them in the right order. Okay.
You said a moment ago that 702 cannot be used to target Americans, correct? But that's cold comfort, isn't it, to the 278,000 people or tens of thousands of people who were the subject of 278,000 improper searches, United States persons that we're talking about in 2022 alone. I mean,
okay. So this is Senator Hawley, and he's talking about in 2022, you had somewhere around in the range of 278,000 improper searches. Okay. So the government 278,000 times searched American citizens when they shouldn't have. Just in 1 year. 278,000 times. That's crazy. That should alarm you. It should do more than alarm you. It should make you angry. So let's continue listening to Mr. Hawley here.
sure, the statute doesn't permit them to be targeted, but when they have their personal information directly queried in an improper search, I mean, what's the difference?
Yeah, thank you, Senator. And obviously, if there's noncompliance with the rules, that's a big problem. And if there's any suggestion that things are being done for political purposes or other improper motives, that's a big problem. It's something I've written about many times. I think there is some comfort for Americans, even if they're queried, from the fact that foreign intelligence targets overseas are the people on whom this collection is based.
Why? Why would that be?
That is a big.
Why would that make me feel any better? As, by the way, as someone who's had his cell phone tapped improperly by the United States government, by the way, why would I feel any better if I'm told that, oh, the U.S. government improperly queried your personal information, and not in this case just your location or something else, your personal communications. The government looked at those, targeted them. You can use whatever verb you want, found them out. But don't worry, they weren't going after you in the first instance. They just happened to have all your stuff, and so then they looked into it because there are no effective constraints on them. I mean, why is that a good thing? Shouldn't we do something about that?
That's kind of wild, isn't it? I want you to think about what the judge here just said. He said, you know, hey, take comfort in knowing that you were not the target. Oh, so how does this work? And we're gonna look at another video that'll explain it a little bit more. Basically, in FISA 702, the idea is the government has authority to search for terrorism and terrorists and monitor communications overseas. But in the process of doing that, they may end up getting a hold of American citizen information. So, for instance, let's say I have a grandma in another country and I call up my grandma. They might say, well, let's check out who this woman is. So, by virtue of accessing her information, they're going to access my communications. And then they'll have all my information or however, whatever information they were able to retrieve in that process. And they're not technically supposed to be looking through it. But then they might say, well, let's look through it since we have access, since we're here, right? Might as well check it out since we've got it. That's basically what's going on. This is why you've got improper, because FISA 702 was not meant for me. It was meant for potential terrorists overseas. But because I may be calling somebody who may be a terrorist or maybe not a terrorist, right? They just might be some foreign person, grandma, whatever, a friend, that I met and moved back to their country or whatever, right? Any number of reasons. And so as long as and there is no limit on foreigners who they can search and who they can monitor. So that basically means there's no limit on American citizens. That's kind of what that means.
I think members of Congress do have a heightened reason for concern, a heightened expectation of safeguards in this area. Members of Congress have every right and every reason to talk to foreign officials. And of course, the executive
What about
branch
journalists? What about normal Americans who is somebody who's got a family member who lives overseas? I don't care who the person is. My point is, when you've got in a single year 278,000 improper queries, it seems to me it makes no difference to the Americans whose data was improperly searched to say, well, but it's really okay because you weren't targeted. Yeah, all your stuff was read, all your private stuff, but don't worry, you weren't targeted. I mean, apparently you were effectively targeted.
Pretty wild, huh? Like you were effectively targeted. And this is this is why citizens must be vigilant, because you hear me all the time talk about government this, government that, and it's like, oh man, this guy's a conspiracy theorist, right? Like I'm one of those podcast dudes that you see in the movies where they're crazy. They're like, the government's coming after you. I'm not really that guy, but I might sound like that guy because I keep raising the alarm. And the reason that I raise the alarm is because government has this history of a little bit more, a little bit more. It's the whole, you give them an inch, they take, 50 miles. That's basically what happened. So it's our job as citizens to say, whoa, whoa, whoa. That's not the level of power that you should have. That is not the level of authority you should have. And if something is improper, somebody should pay for that. Somebody important, not the low-level person. I mean, perhaps them too. Perhaps you could do an investigation and determine, okay, should this low-level employee, government employee, should they have known better? Should they have, was there a reasonable expectation that they would have said, I'm not doing that, and then raise the alarm to, their supervisor, their other supervisor, whoever, right? You could have that argument. But at the end of the day, heads need to roll. And they need to be somebody who made a call, who made a judgment. So let's see, where are we here with the comments? So that was the comment. So that was the video that accompanied this Mike Lee post. He had another one here where he says, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act exists to pursue foreign terrorists, not U.S. citizens. They tried to use FISA to screw Republicans. Republicans must not reauthorize FISA 702 again without requiring a warrant to investigate U.S. citizens. So that's basically where we are. We're like, hey, we've got this thing that perhaps it's a good thing. Go monitor people from other countries and make sure that they're not plotting to come over here and do something evil and vile. And that's cool. I like, not cool, but like that's appropriate. That's reasonable. But at the same time, Americans have a certain level of privacy expectation that should not be infringed on. And it's not even an expectation, literally codified in our Constitution, right? Let's see, I think was that the last one? So I'm going to play Kash Patel. And what I want is I want us to disregard how much we might not like Kash Patel. And I want you to just hear what he's saying, because I think what he's saying is worthwhile. okay, in this particular context to get an understanding of what is going on. So I know we have some issues with the Epstein files and some other things. That doesn't necessarily mean that these that these representatives or these appointed people don't have something useful to say. So let's just keep that in mind. All right, here we go.
The biggest concern I have going forward is the politicization and weaponization and creation of a two-tier system of justice as a result. Back when Devin Nunes and I ran the Russiagate investigation and exposed the FISA corruption, we recommended a slew of fixes so it never happened again. Unfortunately, Congress chose to allow 702 FISA to basically be reauthorized. What does that mean? What is 702?
Okay, so that sounds like a story, that we've all heard before. Hey, this appointed person or this person in this position has identified an issue, and then the expectation would be that Congress resolves it, and then they don't. Sound familiar? Yeah, like Doge and many other things. So ultimately, at the end of the day, your Congress is your problem, okay? It's not the legislation. I mean, it is. But it's really your Congress, because if they're not putting the effort in to say, hey, looks like this legislation that had good intentions was abused. Let's resolve that. Let's take care of this. But if they're not going to do that, then they don't belong in office. They can be removed and say, hey, you didn't support this. We should remember back a number of episodes ago when I reviewed all the legislation here in Florida that's related to property taxes. There was like 13 bills, right? And they were all basically different, right? How they were approaching property tax and to give some level of relief. Now, none of them did it in the fullest extent. None of them went all the way, but they all did something. And I think that's what we should have on issues that are this important. There should be like 10 or 12 bills that have been sponsored by different people that perhaps do slightly different things. And then we should be able to look at them and say, oh, bill number 4, this fourth bill, that's the one we really like. That's the one we want everybody to get behind and rally behind. Like, there should be like this marketplace almost, this competition for good bills when it comes to issues like this. I should be reporting to you that there are like 12 bills that address this issue, but it looks like there's about one. So just pointing that out. All right, let's listen. It's your Congress. Remember, your Congress is your problem.
It's fancy for foreign intelligence surveillance. It means me as a former national security prosecutor and intelligence operative would go overseas and manhunt terrorists. That's what it's for. But the FISA court in April of 2022 publicized an opinion that said the FBI used it illegally 275,000 times domestically against Americans, 16 different occasions against those affiliated with January 6th, 19,000 times domestically against donors to a congressional campaign, and wait for it, 24,000 separate times against Americans and groups in and around January 6th.
Okay, that's insane. That clip right there should be making the social media rounds where he's just laying out, this is what happened. That should have went around. That should have went viral. People should have been like, what the hell? Absolutely not. That's not acceptable. Right. And I know some people out there might be like, oh, but January, improper is improper. Whether you supported January 6th or not, it doesn't matter. Either the government was in the right or they were not. If they were not in the right, number one, somebody should be punished. Number two, if there's an opportunity where something can be used or abused in an unintended way, then Congress should address it. Right? They should start taking, and again, we should have multiple bills to talk about.
That FISA process has been turned on its head redirected inwards, and anyone who says, oh, that's just a Republican conspiracy speak, that's the FISA court that rescinded Rod Rosenstein's illegal surveillance of Donald Trump twice based on our investigation, and now they do it again, and they prove the FBI and DOJ have weaponized justice, and the Republican leadership in Congress allowed it to be reauthorized, essentially through the next election cycle.
Now, I think this is kind of interesting because you might ask yourself, like, why would Republicans allow this to happen? Why would they not say, whoa, wait a minute, this bad thing happened to our side and we want to stop that? Because they want to use it themselves. That's why. You can't. That's the problem with power. And that's the struggle that we're having. And this is what I keep trying to tell people, right? I tell people, if you don't want your enemy to use a particular power against you, then build in a safeguard or simply remove the power. That's probably the better answer. Remove the power altogether. Unfortunately, too many people get caught up into weird arguments. They'll say things like, well, you know, the left, they're not going to show you this kind of mercy. I'm not trying to show people mercy. I am trying to protect myself. And in doing so, in protecting me, I have to protect you, whoever you are, even if you're a commie, right? That's how rights and protections work. They work by me saying, oh, I need to protect me. I don't want my communications monitored illegally. Therefore, I'm going to protect people from January 6th, people from BLM, people from wherever. Maybe you're a commie. Okay, the government still has to do things the right way. Because think about what the government is. The government is just a bunch of people. It's not Republicans. It's not Democrats. Currently, the federal government is under, for the most part, Republican control. I mean, they control the House and they control the Senate and they have the presidency. Whether or not they're actually in control is another thing. But the point being, it's not a Republican government. It's not a Donald Trump government. One day he will be out of office. Let's just assume that you think that Donald Trump and his administration are only doing things by the book. They're doing it all the right. I mean, let's try not to laugh too hard in the morning, but let's assume that you believe that. That will not be the case necessarily for whoever comes next, whether they are Republican or whether they are a Democrat. And you should always be thinking, do I want my enemies to have this level of power? It's not, oh, I want to protect my enemies. Do I want this power used against me? If I don't, I should probably do something about it.
So what will this mean in terms of the FBI, Christopher Wray, going into the next election?
Well, that's just it. Christopher Wray goes to Congress and says, I fixed it all. We have more training. Well, unfortunately, when you have the police officers, the cops in this country who break the law, we can't rely on themselves to police themselves. That is a communist form of a police representation. What we have to have had done is Congress to put forth a bill that put in cops from Congress in the FISA process at the FISA court, limiting their abuse of this power. I mean, just think of it. If Chris Wray and Merrick Garland and company utilized the FISA process to manhunt terrorists that were illegally coming into our country through our southern border, we wouldn't lose 24 of them based on their own testimony. And so what Chris Wray has now done is weaken American national security and redirected one of the most sensitive intelligence apparatuses against elections and those protesting their free speech right within America. And every time the FISA court asked the FBI, why did you allow your agents to do this? Their answer was, I could not recall. And they gave them a get out of jail free card, and the Republican majority, I know this is harsh, rewarded them for breaking the law and allowing this election interference to continue through 2024, mainly against Donald Trump.
Okay. So I don't know when that video clip is. I know it's a little bit on the older side, but he's kind of giving you a lay of the land of this FISA 702. Okay. And so now the answer is, okay, what kind of legislation is out there? What do we got? Right. Because if your Congress isn't doing anything, then all is going to be the same, because you can give people training. The training really, like, think about if you've ever been in training. We love the running joke. Let's just be honest, okay? If you've ever taken sexual harassment training, somebody somewhere has said, yeah, I took the training. Now I know how to sexually harass people. And then we all have a good laugh. Right? Somebody has said that. And the point is, a lot of this training, it just is like it's telling you, don't do this, don't do this. You can get in trouble for this. And in many cases, people are like, oh, I didn't know that. I didn't even know that you could do that, because most people aren't trying to abuse these kind of things. Right. So that's why people have the same thing applies with the FBI. Like, if you have FBI agents who are following the law and then you give them training, number one, that's no guarantee that the people who abused this law are going to stop. But now you've actually told more people, like, here's how you abuse the law, or here's how the law can be abused. You're like giving them ideas, right? What you should actually do is just simply withdraw some of the power, or put in some sort of check and balance that helps at least limit the abuse even further, because you're already getting the abuse. So something else has to, and it can't just be training. Be like, all right, guys, I know that you can technically do this. You're not supposed to. Because how do you punish somebody? Oh, you didn't follow our policies. Okay. Well, like, policies are weaker than federal legislation, because with federal legislation, if somebody violates it, they can go to court. If it's just a policy manual issue, then then it's all internal, and the only people that, and the boss might be a little lenient and be like, hey, you've seen the cop movies, right? You've got the crazy agent that'll get out there. I know I'm talking fiction, but you got the agent that'll get out there and they'll just get the job done by any means necessary. And then they come back in after they've blown up half the city, and their boss is yelling at them. They're like, I can't believe you did that. You cost $1 million, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, and they give some excuse. And then the boss is like, they'll say, you're on desk duty. You're benched, or whatever they say, right? And they're like, you can't do that to me, boss. And they're like, I just did. And then they walk out of the room, and then they're like, all right, how am I going to go back to doing what I was doing? Right? I know it's fiction. I get it. I'm not saying that's necessarily how it happens in real life. Maybe it does. What I'm saying is, when it's internal like that, you don't have the teeth are not as sharp. They're not as strong. You need stronger teeth if you want to protect American privacy. So enter in Mike Lee. He has something for us. Put this up on the screen here for you guys to see. So Lee introduces Bipartisan Government Surveillance Reform Act. This was published March 12th, 2026. I'm going to read it to you. Senator Mike Lee of Utah today introduced bipartisan legislation with Senator Ron Wyden out of Oregon to protect Americans' constitutional rights and data privacy. The Government Surveillance Reform Act reauthorizes Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act with necessary Fourth Amendment protections to block the federal government from buying Americans' private data from shady sources. Co-sponsors include Senators Loomis out of Wyoming, Warren out of Massachusetts, Davidson out of Ohio, Lofgren out of California, who introduced the House version of this bill. Skip down here. Let's see what it does. The Government Surveillance Reform Act represents the most comprehensive reform of surveillance laws in nearly half a century. The bill reauthorizes Section 702 for 4 years with necessary privacy reforms and constitutional safeguards, including, so here we've got a bullet point of what this bill does. Closing the backdoor search loophole. The bill requires the federal government to get a warrant to access Americans' private communications gathered under 702, with important exceptions for emergency situations. Now, let me just say this. The bill itself is like about 200 pages long. Why is the bill 200 pages long? it's amending a lot of existing statute. So you got to go in there, and when you read a bill, a lot of times it'll have a good portion of it so that you can read it in context. And then it'll have the changes, the additions, the subtraction, the deletions, et cetera, right? So that's what part of what's going on. It's not like necessarily 200 pages of brand new legislation. So I'm not going to review it like I would normally do by reading through the whole bill and then talking about this section. So we're just going to talk about Mike Lee's representation of the bill. Okay, so I'm going to, on good faith, because he's introducing it in the first place, on good faith, I'm going to assume that I would agree that this bill does what these bullet points say they do. Okay, that's kind of how I'm going to operate. Just to kind of shorten the time a little bit. All right. So with that being said, federal government should always be required to get a warrant. And when I say warrant, I mean one of the real warrants, not an administrative warrant. Okay, that's not a real warrant. One that's signed by a judge. Why? Let's be clear. Who issues the warrant? The executive branch. Okay? If they have to go to the judicial branch to get permission to get it signed, then that means two branches of government have now worked together to say, we're going to violate your rights. You have the right to privacy. If the government is going to violate, if they're going to issue a warrant to search your stuff, two branches of government should actually be involved and say, yes, this is an important exception to this right. This is the government giving you proper due process by saying two different branches who should be check and balancing each other, two different branches have agreed to violate your right to privacy, that based on the evidence presented was necessary. If you leave it up to just one branch, generally speaking, the executive branch, well, clearly we've seen the result of that. 278,000 searches that were improper. That's what happens when you only have one branch involved. When you have two branches, you might still get that, but maybe that 278,000 number now comes down to like 2,000 or whatever, some really low number, right? Because the judge is going to look and say, what information are you bringing to me? And then they will evaluate that and say, that is sufficient information. That is enough for me to say you have probable cause to go look further. All right. And then it says exceptions for emergency situations. Tentatively, I would support that. I need to see what those emergency situations, how they are enumerated, what they say, what is the exception? What does it allow? What does it not allow? Right? If it's time sensitive, I don't know. But I can see a situation where I would say an emergency situation might be acceptable. Yes. All right. Then we're going to go on. It says closing the data broker loophole. The bill bans the federal government from buying Americans' data from data brokers without a warrant. Yes. Hands down, yes. Again, if the government would have to normally get a warrant, which is extra steps, more work, that, in order to get a judge to sign off on it, they got to have good information, right? Like I could go to imagine I'm in the executive branch. I'm tasked, I'm an agent. And I go to my boss and I say, hey, Fred over here, I need to dig into some of his emails because look at this. Between us trying to, uncover what's going on, we're going to be a little bit more open to less information to convince us to go get what we want. Does that make sense? Like the threshold is lower for us because we're trying to solve a problem. We're trying to get information. We're trying to make sure that a bad thing doesn't happen. So the incentive structure for somebody in the executive branch is to say, hey, to maybe be a little bit loose with when it comes to violating your rights. because they're trying to stop a bad thing from happening, presumably, right? Like that's how we're going to operate. But when you get the judicial branch involved, they don't have that incentive. So they can look and say, no, that's not acceptable, right? And so the warrant is important. Like I just said, you should not be able to get around a warrant by simply buying information from a data broker. That's all it is. That's the loophole. Oh, we don't need to get a warrant. We just buy this information that was totally legit. And right now, it is a legitimate way to operate, to get around the Fourth Amendment, because they're buying it. If I can buy it, then why can't the government, right? The problem is, if I'm buying it, I can't punish you. The government can, based on that information. Prohibit reverse targeting. The bill prohibits using surveillance on foreigners overseas through Section 702 as a pretext for gathering data on Americans. How does this work? I have a grandma. I don't actually have a grandma, but like I have a grandma in a foreign country, right? And I call her up once a week. Say, hi, grandma, how you doing? You know, grandson's doing great, or great-grandson's doing great, whatever, right? So maybe the government wants to surveil me, but they can't just go and surveil me because they'd have to get a warrant, right? If it was just me. That process already exists. So then they go, well, he's got a grandma, and it seems like he calls her once a week. That's kind of the intel that we have. So then what they would do is they would just use my grandma as a pretext. Let's monitor grandma, because they don't have any limitation on her, right? There is no, and they don't have any protections because they're not U.S. citizens. They're not even in the country. So there's no binding, like there might be some legislation, but constitutionally speaking, there is nothing that binds the government from surveilling foreign people. So they're like, all right, we're going to watch DL's grandma, and through that process, we will acquire information about DL, and then we can just take a look through that. That's this reverse targeting, right? And it's a pretext. It's like, oh, and then if they get caught, they're like, we weren't surveilling DL. We got a tip about his grandma, so we were watching her. And then we had his information, so we just took a look just to make sure that there wasn't anything that we missed. That's how that works, okay? And if you don't think your government would do that, I mean, really? Why would you not think that? Like, you should. Do not underestimate your government. Repealing the Make Everyone Spy provision. Now, this one is interesting. This bill repeals a controversial 2024 expansion that allows the government to force millions of Americans and companies to secretly spy on its behalf. How in the world does it do that? So I had it pulled up, and I think I accidentally closed it, but there, and maybe I can pull that back up. Let me see if I can. Let me see. Oh, here it is. Look at that. Is this the one? No, nope, that's not it. Oh, bummer. Oh, you know what? Maybe it was in the myths here. I downloaded. I had quite a bit of information, and then I was like, all right, let me distill this and see what I actually need. Was it in this document? So I'm going to take a look here. Oh, where was it? It was from the Brennan Center, and no, it wasn't this. It might have been a web page. Dang it, I lost it. Let's see here, section 702. Let's see, was this one? Okay, well, I can't find it, so I was gonna read it to you, so that because they wrote it and they did it much better than I did. So I'll just tell you about it. Okay, so here's what ends up happening. There's some term that they use that applies to like Verizon and Comcast and all these major companies, right? And they're basically like, okay, we can request of you to assist us in surveilling people. But then what they did was they said, all right, we're going to expand who qualifies under this definition. So if you're somebody that's offering like free Wi-Fi at your hotel to guests, then you're the equivalent of somebody who's like a Comcast or a Verizon. So they basically said they just expanded the scope of who they could tap to work with when it comes to surveillance by law. That's how that worked. And so what this would do is this would say, no, you can't make everyone a spy by saying the local coffee shop who offers free Wi-Fi access is now the same effectively as Verizon Wireless, who is a major telecommunications company that's offering services, and hey, the argument being they're so big, they have so much coverage that they've got to be able to work, that they have to work with us. But also the coffee shop does too. So we're going to tell the coffee shop, hey, we need you to provide us this access, this information, whatever, so that we can see what's going on. That's basically what it does. So so what this does is this make everyone a spy provision in Mike Lee's bill. What this does is says you can't do that. It repeals and this was an expansion, right? So this is something that was codified in law. So it repeals that and it says, no, you no longer can do that. Now you have to treat the big players as if they're uniquely different, and then you have to go get a warrant for all the small players, right? Because you need something more specific. And that makes sense, even if you support, the surveillance from major companies. Because at least a major company is huge, right? And so it covers a lot of people. Your local coffee shop is going to cover it'll cover a lot of people. It's a lot in that context. It's different, but it's not nearly the same because you're talking maybe 100 different people. What are the odds that within that 100 people, there might be some sort of information that the government needs to stop a bad terrorist plot? Very, very unlikely. And so if they have that level of information that there's somebody there that they need, then they can go get a warrant. They can go do through the because they should presumably have the information that they need to get a warrant at that point. If they know that, Fred is at the coffee shop and Fred, appears to be plotting to do something bad, something evil, they should have enough information to go get the warrant. It's a little different if they're like, all right, we're going to work with Verizon, some big major company. It's a little different in that because you might not have the information that you need at that point. Not to say that I necessarily agree with it. I think the government should always get a warrant anytime they're accessing any information from you at any time, period. Warrant all the time. Let's see what else. Reforming intelligence collection outside FISA. This bill protects Americans from intelligence agencies using non-statutory authorities, including by prohibiting backdoor searches and reverse targeting outside of FISA. So this just strengthens and says, hey, look, there are other ways in which the government is getting your information. We're going to close that. Updating privacy protections for AI and other modern technologies. This bill requires federal law enforcement to get a warrant to surveil Americans' location information, web browsing data, search and chatbot records, and car onboard and telematics data. So any information about you should require a warrant signed by a judge. So now we're in this new world where we have to literally say signed by a judge. No administrative warrants. There was a constitutional lawyer that I follow from the Institute of Justice. And who was it? I think it was the Department of Homeland Security. They were being dragged through the mud on social media for arresting somebody supposedly without a warrant. And they were like, no, we have a warrant. And they posted it. And then his name is Patrick. I don't know how you say his last name, but his name is Patrick with the Institute of Justice. And he responded to them and he said, that's not a warrant. It's just warrant shaped. He goes, warrants are signed by a judge, right? It was an administrative warrant. And so these go hand in hand. If you thought administrative warrant is good enough, just know that you are now putting yourself and all your fellow Americans at more risk of surveillance by their own government, right? Because here we're saying we need this legislation to require a warrant, which is not that impressive if it ends up being an administrative warrant. If we end up saying, administrative warrant is acceptable, that's good enough, then basically what Mike Lee here is presenting is kind of been neutered. The strength in this is that it requires a warrant signed by a judge for the reasons that I said earlier. Let's see, halting warrantless collection of business records. This protects Americans' data from warrantless collection under an authority that expired over 5 years ago. Okay? We should halt things. And like this one's kind of weird. Like I don't know specifically what these are exactly, like how they've been used necessarily. That would have taken more digging. So, and again, the bill itself was like 198 pages. So in order to read it, it would have taken a significant amount of time. Then I would have had to research and say, okay, how has this been actually playing out? So again, I'm going in faith on Mike Lee's site that this bill would do what we're reading that it would do for the reasons that it's necessary, that it's saying are necessary. Lastly, enhancing oversight and accountability. The bill strengthens judicial oversight, public reporting, and accountability requirements under FISA. I will always support more oversight when it comes to your rights. Always, always. I will never turn it down, right? Well, I will almost never turn it down. Like if I see something's just redundant and just going to end up spending more money and we've already got a provision in place for it, then yeah, I might oppose that. Okay. But ultimately, I always will look and say more oversight before violating your rights is always in order, right? If we're missing oversight, then we add it, plain and simple. So for this bill, tentatively, I would support it. It goes on and it says, the Government Surveillance Reform Act is endorsed by privacy and civil liberty advocates across the political spectrum. And then it lists them. Americans for Prosperity, Restore the Fourth, Brennan Center for Justice at NYU School of Law. By the way, the Brennan Center is a little bit more on the left-leaning side. Okay, if you got Americans for Prosperity, they tend to be on the right. Center for Democracy and Technology, Consumer Choice Center, Demand Progress Due Process Institute, Electronic Privacy Information Center, Fight for the Future, National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers, and the Project for Privacy and Surveillance Accountability. Okay? When you have this many organizations that say, we support this legislation, that actively go out and fight for your civil liberties or raise the alarms, right? When you've got that many that are varied across the political spectrum, probably wise to take heed and say, yeah, this is a good bill. Or at least what the bill intends to do is good. Then we should read it and make sure that it's actually written well and will accomplish what it says that it will accomplish. Okay. Then it just gives some quotes down here. Let's see. I don't think there's anything else. I think that was it. So I just wanted to go through this particular bill. Again, it's the Government Surveillance Reform Act. I support it as a good step forward. Is it the end all be all? Absolutely not. If it were up to me, this bill probably, I'm just guessing because, you know, I'm a libertarian. I'm very difficult. I will assume that if I read through the bill, I would find a lot of ways under which it could be strengthened and be stronger and more tough on government. So it's probably not as tough as I would like it to be. However, I will support it because I think moving forward in a direction that ensures the protections of the rights of citizens is always a good step forward. It's always good to step forward. So I will support that. Where's my little pass button? There it is. Ding. I support this. Again, tentatively, without having read the details, just by taking in good faith what Mike Lee has said about it and what others have said about FISA 702 and how it has been used. So that is my show for today. That is my bill review. Doesn't look like there's any comments, so I will just head on out. I will see you guys tomorrow. I guess we're going to have kind of like a standard week like we used to back in the day, because I have no interviews this week. My co-host is still on maternity leave. She recently had a baby. So once she's back up and running and she's got things worked out, and you know, new babies are tough. And then, they got other kids. So they got a handful over there. But once she's back up and running, we will continue on our Wednesday show where we talk about things from a slightly different perspective. I bring somebody, and if you've listened to the show, then you know that Human Frequency that's the title of the series on Wednesday. That is about talking about the more human element, emotions, how people feel, those kind of things. Kind of get away from the facts and the figures and the cold, hard logic, right? And kind of make sure that we don't forget that at the end of the day, all these policies, all these topics, they involve human beings. There should be a human element in them. With that being said, folks, I'm out for today. I will see you tomorrow.
You know that I'm all about supporting organizations that hold my values. Make sure you head on over to blackgunsmatter.shop. They've got apparel, stickers, and more. Use the code LibertyDad, all one word, at checkout to score a 10% discount. Or just hit the referral link in the show notes. That'll make it so much easier. Remember, I'm not just a voice on a mic. I'm a dad who's working hard to deliver to you the best libertarian content. Connect with me on Linktree, where you'll find links to my Patreon and buy me a coffee, because every bit helps keep this show rolling. Plus, you can find me on my other platforms to stay in the loop. With your help, this show, The Message of Liberty, will be seen and heard by more people. As always, I appreciate you tuning in and look forward to seeing